Hello everybody. Short announcement. There will be a Q&A session after this lecture, so if you at the moment don't have questions, but you have at the end, please go to the mic, stay in line and ask your questions, so if it's okay with you. Our today's lecture, Does Not Compute Why Doctors Hate IT, will be delivered by Christina. She's from Germany, and she's an expert and she writes articles for medical informations. So please give a warm welcome to Christina. Enjoy.
Yeah, thanks for having me. As you said, this is a talk about medical doctors and the use of IT. And why is this a topic at all? In healthcare, there is increasing digitalization like in other fields. And if, for example, you think about how much the field of communication or transport or entertainment has been revolutionized by the use of the internet and interconnectedness, then you would expect the same for the field of healthcare. So there are vast possibilities, if you think about it. However, compared to other fields, digitalization has a bit fallen behind in the field of healthcare. So basically, this is what we want, and this is what we have. What we have are clunky user interfaces like this one, and a lack of user friendliness. And if you walk into a hospital and you look at the applications, the majority still looks like this. So. There has been a recent survey among German doctors. I have pulled some quotes from that, and something that German doctors at least often say is that they expect digitalization to increase, but they cannot yet see how they themselves or their patients will profit from it, either financially or otherwise. Another objection that is made very often is that digitalization involves too much bureaucracy, which is kind of a paradox, because if you look at other fields, then through the use of the internet, there has been less bureaucration. Like, for example, nowadays when you book a room through Airbnb, there is less paperwork to be done than when you booked a hotel room the traditional way 20 years ago. But this is not yet the case in healthcare. Then another thing that is thought quite often is, doctors understandably put much emphasis on the importance of the doctor-patient relationship as a personal relationship. And they feel that the use of digital methods does not support the development of relationships, but somehow gets in the way or is supposed to replace it. Again, this is not necessary. If you look at other fields like instant messaging, for example, has done a lot to make personal relationships easier. Then they often fear that patients acquire some kind of pseudo-knowledge from surfing the web, like asking Dr. Google for diagnosis, and then they have to work to correct this diagnosis if it is wrong. This is, I think, a valid objection sometimes, But on the other hand, there are new, or there could be new resources for patient education that are better than just Googling random websites. But also this field is not as well developed as it could be. Then, of course, there's the objection of data privacy, which is very important. I will come back to that later. And another thing is that healthcare professionals feel that elder patients, and there are, of course, a lot of them, because the older we get, the sicker we get, they cannot keep up with the technological development. This is also true, I think, but something that will be resolved by and by as we as digital natives also get older and sicker. But today it is certainly a valid objection. So I have defined 5 problem fields that are responsible for the objections that medical professionals have towards the use of IT. The first one is the problem of usability. You saw that user interface earlier. This here are data from a survey among US doctors, and the majority say that the electronic health record system in their organization is hard to use. This here. And you have to remember that these are all people that went to university more or less successfully, and they basically have been using computers for a long, long time in their private lives and professional lives, and still they are finding it hard to use. And in accordance with that, when asked what is most important to actually improve patient care through the use of IT, the most important thing is to improve functionality and ease of use. Because when you have a bad user interface and you have to use it in situations where there is a time pressure and you have to act for the sake of patients' lives or health, then it is critical that you don't get confused or lose any time or have misunderstandings that lead to worse patient care. Something that follows from these bad user interfaces and also from a lack of time is that sometimes workflows using IT in hospitals are a bit curious. As I said, there is often time pressure, and there's often a lack of resources in hospitals, a lack of personnel, and there's basically too much to be done in too little time. And when there are new people on staff, often they are just dropped onto the station and they are said, do your work. And if they are lucky, they will maybe find an experienced nurse who takes 3 minutes to show them how to log into the system. But often there is a lack of rigorous training. And so people try around and figure it out for themselves, and this situation like this is often the result. Just a side thought that I mentioned earlier, as us digital natives not only get older and get sick, but also get old enough to have responsible roles in healthcare. We are more used to employing IT to solve our problems than the generations before us, and so it gets a little bit easier even if usability is not improved, but still the majority of the progress is to be had if usability is actually improved. So, the second problem field is the lack of resources that I already mentioned. This is again this US survey. These doctors were asked if the use of IT has actually increased or decreased the amount of time spent with patients. And the majority found or thought that it had decreased the amount of time spent with patients. Again, this is not, of course, as it should be, because IT should be there to make our lives easier and not to get in the way of actually accomplishing things. And as many healthcare professionals, doctors and nurses rightly say, their primary goal is to interact with patients, to talk to them, to take a correct history, to make a diagnosis, to do procedures on them, and not to figure out how the IT system is supposed to work. So that's the second field. Now to the third. The third problem field is the perceived questioning of authority. This, again, is another data source published in a German journal for medical doctors, the Ärzteblatt, and they said that earlier, maybe 20 years ago, the medical professionals were actually they were defining how medicine was supposed to work, and all related fields, they were just there to support patient care and support the results. And with supporting fields, I mean medical informatics, quality management, etc. So this was basically an autonomy in the field of medicine. And this author hypothesized that today there are these formerly supportive fields that have now taken over and are now prescribing how to practice medicine without actually being a medical professional. Among them, IT professionals. This is just the opinion of this author. It's not necessarily correct, and you have to look at it more closely, but it is often, a situation like this is often quoted as an objection why they don't want increased use of IT. One example is the use of the IBM supercomputer Watson, which is nowadays also used to find medical diagnosis. And in this context, it is referred to as Dr. Watson. The workflow is basically like this. Dr. Watson receives from the physician data about the patient's signs and symptoms. Then independently it searches the clinical databases for example, the patient history that has been entered earlier, the family history, the current drugs, etc. Then when the patient has entered the hospital, other procedures are performed that result in new data like lab work or radiology pictures. And Dr. Watson also includes these results. Then it goes on the web to search for medical literature and medical guidelines. Then it takes together all of these data to analyze it and to form hypotheses. It makes a list of hypotheses, that is a list of probable diagnoses, and every diagnosis gets a certain probability, and then it outputs this list of diagnoses. However, not every one of these steps is visible for the user from the outside, and so sometimes it looks like kind of a black box or something that has no transparency. Or if it had transparency, it would maybe look too complicated to understand it in a reasonable amount of time. So this, if you rely in your decisions on something that you do not understand, then this of course leads to the objection, what if the computer is wrong? Who's responsible? That's the next problem field, the question of responsibility. I'm not sure about the situation situation internationally, but I think in most systems that have actually discussed this problem, the major opinion is that if a doctor or someone else decides to use a decision support system, then he or she is still responsible for the outcome, and not, well, of course, not the computer. You can't put a computer in jail or fee him or anything if it is wrong. There are, of course, some exceptions, like when you can prove that the manufacturer has done something wrong. But the basic principle is you decide to use the decision support system, and after this decision, you are responsible for the outcome. However, the more and more these support systems are in practical use, the more people feel that maybe they will have pressure to use them in the future, so that they are under the suspicion of being not responsible and not thorough enough if they decide not to use the computer system. And so if they feel the pressure to use the system, but they are still responsible for the outcome, it leads to a kind of unfair situation. And this is why, still going back to this survey from Accenture, many of the respondents said that they are concerned about the impact of the use of IT on the actual treatment quality and the amount of errors. So, and on to the last problem, which is, of course, the problem of privacy and security. This is something that you will still often see in hospitals and private practices. This is not because people don't know any better in most cases, but I think the most important reason is, as I said earlier, the lack of time and lack of resources, because you always have to find a compromise between convenience and security. And if you have too little time to do your job, you will usually take the shortcut and take the convenient route and not the safe route, which leads to situations like this. You probably know this one here. It says that your security mechanisms or your cryptography can, in theory, be excellent and uncrackable, but if you find an easy way or brute force way around it, then it's not worth anything. This is a study from the SANS Institute, which most of you probably also know. They did a report on cyber threats in healthcare and asked people what they thought was already efficient in the organizations and what was not. And I will not go through all of this in detail, but something, for example, that's interesting is that most people are skeptical about the security of electronic medical devices. which is supported, I think, by recent news, because there are more and more medical devices in the news that have some kind of backdoor or vulnerability. And people are also skeptical about big data initiatives and the exchange of data with other organizations. Yeah. So the SANS Institute pulled some examples from the web. For example, here, someone did not bother to change the admin credentials, and there was easy login if you know what to look for. And it's actually easy to look for it, because if you just search for the type of the device you want to access and the words default password, then you will often have a useful result. And as they say, this isn't even hacking, this is just Googling. So, this was what I wanted to say about this. If you are interested in this subject, I have more literature. Just ask me in person or send me an email. And now I would be very interested in hearing your thoughts on the subject and to answer any questions. Thank you.
Hi, it was an interesting view from your side as a doctor. I am myself a software developer, and even I didn't work directly on medical software. I have friends who work on these kind of programs. And one of their problems is the standards and certificates that you need to have, or I don't know, fulfill to make this kind of program. And sometimes it's so hard to focus on the interface when you have to do this kind of testing and you have to use this kind of approved technology. And it's so hard when you make a change to deliver it very fast. And there are a lot of obsolete technologies that are in productions only because there is this bureaucracy between the developer and the end user.
Yeah, that's very true. It's good that you broached this subject, because there's something I forgot to say. I actually wanted to have a short lightning talk about this, but there are no lightning talks. There is an initiative called I Am the Cavalry, and they are not only working in the healthcare field, but also in the automotive field. But, well, I just know about healthcare. They suggested a Hippocratic oath for connected medical devices, which includes a suggestion of having more standards, and especially more standards that are already approved in other industries. If you're interested, you can maybe go and look at their website.
Hi. So you mentioned, actually talked about doctors having problems with patients Googling symptoms and stuff at home, and coming up with some wrong diagnostics. But what do you think about websites like WebMD and mobile applications that are aimed at patients and not doctors themselves? Is this something that should continue, or should medical IT and software be only aimed at doctors? in the future?
Well, if you ask for my personal opinion, I think they are useful if they are quality, if somehow the quality is certain, and there are some certifications to make sure that there is nothing wrong on these sites, because they lead to more responsibility on the side of the patients. However, not every patient is able to use these resources. But as I said earlier, as our generation gets older, there are more and more patients who are willing and able to look up their diseases in internet resources. So I think this is useful, and I think its use will increase in the future. I think there will always be some problems connected with it, like patients being convinced that they have something that they don't, but some doctors are afraid of this. But I think this is not a new risk. This is something that can also happen when patients use other information resources. So, yeah, in summary, I think my personal opinion is that it's a good thing if the quality is good enough. Yeah.
So do you still recommend going to a doctor in real life after like doing your own research at home?
Well, yes, of course.
Yes.
But this is an interesting question, because as a medical professional, in the moment in which you say no, you don't have to go to see a doctor, then you are responsible for the outcome. And if you Google your symptoms, and I tell you no, you don't have to go to the doctor, it's just a migraine, and you go home and drop dead, then it's my fault. So if you ask a professional, he or she will probably only very rarely say you can safely stay at home and not go to a doctor.
You were talking about the quality of the user interfaces and that many doctors complain that the software is difficult to use. What do you think is the reason why this hasn't improved in a lot of time? Couldn't some medical software company just get 5 people from Apple and 5 people from Google and make a super user interface? Where do you think is the difficulty?
That's an interesting question, and something that I really don't know. So anything I say is pure speculation. And I think it may be because it is a kind of regulated market, and it's not a monopoly, but a market with very few players. And the development towards becoming more user-friendly is something that usually starts in consumer-oriented companies, and maybe they don't have the resources or the incentives to go and play in the medical market. That would be my first guess, but honestly, I can't really say.
Do you think it would help if doctors would complain more to the developers of the software that they use?
Certainly.
Then do some complaining.
Yes. That's a good direction. Do more complaining, and you will get better user interfaces. I think that may be a true statement generally. So if there are no more questions now, I'm still, yeah?
Okay, great presentation. Thanks for being here. You've mentioned in your presentation IBM Watson, aka Dr. Watson, how it operates. You called it black box, right? And you mentioned problem 4, as I remember, responsibility, right?
Yeah.
So, do you guys, is it mandatory in Germany? Are you guys forced to use this kind of technologies?
No, not at all.
Not at all?
This was something that is in professional articles about this subject, that is often cited as an objection that IT is developing towards replacing doctors, or at least replacing important functions. But this is by far not something that has happened yet.
I mean, you know how it operates, right? But still, it's not enough transparency to the real doctors. They generate a carton, a board, whatever, you get the complete history of diseases for a patient, right? But it's based on some other research, not for a specific country, not for a Germany, for example, right? So they collect all the data and they generate some kind of answer for the patient you have, for example. Yeah. So what are your thoughts on that? How is it shown? I mean, the percentage of successful rate for curing the patients?
I think at the stage where you have a clinical decision support, the current question is not yet how much does it improve outcomes for patients, but the first question is it more accurate in finding a diagnosis than a human? That's the first question to answer, and it is still a hard enough question. And the other question, if it improves outcomes, comes afterwards. The question why it may be perceived as a black box, the reason why you want to use Dr. Watson is one of the reasons is that it can go online and analyze the medical literature and the guidelines and do this more extensively and more efficiently than a human could. At that moment, when it performs better than a human, then the human cannot judge its ability anymore, because there's Dr. Watson, and Dr. Watson has read 5,000 articles on disease X, and I have only read 13, and he comes to a different conclusion than I do, and then I don't know. Is it because he got all this useful information from the 5,000 papers, or the 4,900 something that I haven't read, or is it because something went wrong on the way?
So you guys obviously use some sort of systems like Dr. Watson, right?
They are in use in some hospitals. I don't work in a hospital currently.
So are they to be trusted or what? Are they trustworthy?
Yeah, that's the question. How do you want to judge this? Me personally, I tend to trust in a system, even if especially if it performs better than I can. But there are some limits, or there should be some kind of independent quality control to make sure that there are no bugs, as far as you can ever have no bugs, but no very important bugs. It's a very hard question. How do you make sure?
Okay, thanks.
We finished way ahead of time, I think. You can still talk to me today and tomorrow. I will be here. Or you can write me an email, and I will be very happy to hear more opinions and experiences and questions on this subject. Thank you.